Software that used to take months can now be built in weeks. Not prototypes, production systems. Today, we walk through a real application built with AI coding agents to show you what's actually possible.
As fast as we could write those designs, we can get to code and code that's production caliber code pretty quickly.
It's a reboot of literally how you think of the timing of your software releases, how fast you think you can achieve what markets you want to go after. I mean, it's such an enabler.
This is starting to flip the whole paradigm of how we traditionally have evaluated build versus buy.
Hey guys, so welcome to another episode of the podcast. I think we got a pretty interesting, it's a little bit different of an episode, I think this time. We've been busy, when I say we, mostly Alon. Alon's been really busy, really diving into agentic development and actually centered around, really trying to build almost like next generation capabilities into software and better understand how that's done. And what we thought we would do is we'd share some of that with you in the context of a demo that's a CRM. Everybody's sort of seen a CRM. And the point is not to show you sort of the next CRM, but the point is to use that as a way to sort of tell the story about what we're seeing in AI, what we're seeing around AI development, and I think lessons to be learned about what the next generation of applications might look like. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alon, and we'll start the discussion there.
Great. Thanks, Pete. Hope everybody had a great holidays. I have been busy, but I'm not the only one. Mike here has been a collaborator and a few others. And most of all, I think Claude and OpenAI have been very busy. Like we're burning tokens like there's no tomorrow. Those things are flying. I think I saw the last bill. We're clocking $1,000 a week on Claude, just on Claude, not including the Nano Banana and all the other I'm actively using. So, as Pete was saying, we embarked on this mission. We're in several industries, and in one market where we got really interested in the way customers interact with the service provider. From a service provider viewpoint, there's a CRM, right? A system to manage those interactions. And from the customer perspective, there's a customer portal. Here we'll sort of deep dive into like, what is the service provider's view of their customers and how do they interact? And if you think about CRMs, right, their core job is to track, right? Is to track what happened with the customer, track all the activities. So one is, help me close deals if I'm in that mode of a sales representative. Help me understand the customer behavior over time from a marketing perspective, and from a management perspective, how's my business performing? Am I going to hit my targets? Are customers churning and all that kind of stuff? So the underlying data is what's critical, right? Knowing who your customers are, is what they're doing, how they're interacting with you, is the source that you crave to make all those kinds of judgment calls. Historically, I would say that, we're talking to a customer and they're like, okay, we're ready to go implement something. It's going to be a multi-month, call it, $100,000 plus kind of effort to minimum to get started. And we were just curious if is there a better way, given all this hype around AI, is there a better way to think about it? And we said, okay, give us a couple of weeks to try to work through this in our own minds. Like if you're you've got specific needs, how do those needs get addressed today with classic CRMs versus what you could build bespoke? And so we started down a path of first building requirements. What does a CRM system for a specific industry do? In this case, we're dealing with basically providers to the low voltage, audio, video, entertainment kind of solutions, right? They serve both commercial and residential. What does their CRM system look like? And at the end of the day, we said, okay, here's a dozen things you have to do. Everything from integrating to other systems, integrating to telephony, integrating into email and scheduling software. Obviously, all the database record keeping, some industry specific modules for doing proposals and other kinds of things. So you got a fairly large ecosystem you're going to touch. And so we looked at it, it was kind of daunting. I said, hey, this is, traditionally you would say, fine, fire up Salesforce or Zoho, depending on which end of the market you're in, and start customizing, right? And that's where you get to the 100,000 plus kind of like just configuration effort. And so we went down the road saying, well, let's just let's use our core know-how and underlying platform that we built over time that's helps us write new code and see how far we can get. And what we found is as fast as we were able to build good designs, which you would need either, for implementing any system, whether you're configuring a system right from scratch, as fast as we could write those designs, we can get the code and code that's production caliber code pretty quickly to get written. So the overall experience was such that we said, well, we can, listen very carefully to a customer, use domain knowledge that we, obviously have gained over years, and then just specify what we want and specify it in a way that leans on a technical architecture that's, that's tried and true, and scale up a system at the speed at which it would historically take you just to configure, a traditional CRM or ERP kinds of systems.
Right.
But that was sort of the big learning, I would say.
Right. So maybe, Alon, if you wouldn't mind, I think pulling it up and sort of just seeing a little bit of an action.
And we've talked enough. Let's just show some stuff.
Right, exactly. Because, and while you're doing that, I was just going to sort of chime in. It feels to me too like job descriptions probably more. I mean, I could see a world where a business person who's running some line of business actually becomes almost like the product manager, because the capabilities to sort of define things and design things and provide quality specs and so on into a development team are much, much greater. So I think it's going to be really interesting organizationally. I think those lines do start to blur.
Yeah. For sure.
Maybe just a quick tour, and then maybe talk about some of the concepts of how you've sort of thought about this maybe differently than a traditional CRM.
So in other words, when we're building CRM functionality, we're not saying, how do we just build a system of record? We're saying, well, how does a sales rep just, work their to-do list? And which part of the to-do list can be automated so they could just flag those as, hey, these are all the tasks I need done. Can you help me get them done, right? The idea is that you want to start all the way at the beginning of saying, what is it you're trying to deliver, and be ambitious enough about what you can deliver. And then there's all the, how fast you could deliver it and with the right quality and all that, right? There's the implementation, but it starts with having the right vision for the products that I don't think is the same vision that we had 2 years ago. So quick kind of, get familiar with the system. Think of it as like most CRMs have this funnel, right? Where you're starting with some kind of an opportunity. The early stages, the marketing leads, right? So you got a bunch of leads that come in. You're then going to work the leads through the sales funnel, right? You got to qualify them. After you qualify leads that turn into opportunities, you work the opportunities through the stages of the pipeline, hoping to get to a positive result, right, in closing. Along the way, you are tracking the accounts that are related to those opportunities, and those accounts are then related to contacts within those accounts. The sort of the key entities that you're working with in any CRM. And then around the periphery of that is a bunch of processes. How do you do what you do, right, as a company, which leads to a lot of configuration in those CRMs, right? Either you're buying something and then you want to, depending on your standard operating procedures, you want to customize it to do the work the way you expect to do the work. And then there's a series of, so what's very rich in many systems like ERPs and CRM is this configuration area. Like how flexible is it to meet my goals? And no different than others, we wanted to make sure that we could address market worth of needs as opposed to one specific customer. And so even though this is a very young project, in a sense, we've built a lot of that stuff that only accumulate after years of being in the field. I'll pause there, Pete, to see where you want me to go.
You took a perspective that was much more, how do I enable the salesperson, as opposed to how do I just sort of capture the record?
Yeah.
And maybe we could talk about some places where you see that.
Yeah. So an interesting spot is if you think about even just the start of the funnel, the lead generation. So let me sort of show that here. When there's the typical kind of like, okay, enter a form that contains all the lead information, right? Now this may be populated automatically if you're wired to, let's say you have a web form, a contact form on your web, or other channels by which you take leads in, right? This may get populated automatically. One of the things that we added up front is the idea to say, okay, look, if you have any sort of records, right, whether they are audio files, right? A call recording, an image, a screenshot of something. We should be able to take that in and automatically create a lead for you from that. So the process that you saw here is we essentially piped in a audio file. So this might be the call recording. We transcribed it with using a model for transcription. And then we took the transcription and fed it all these purple fields that you see are automatically extracted on your behalf. And so you're in process, you're sort of viewing and approving this, right? In order to create a lead, but all that is sort of automated, right? And so there's not this time of like, okay, cut and paste and carefully edit stuff. And the sophistication of that, we sort of see it as like, this is equivalent to, well, whoever was responsible for typing stuff in, right? Like entering those lead forms. That's the job of the agent, the lead gen agent here is to capture all that. What's nice is that because we're doing it in this way, not only do you get the record, right, but you get kind of the history of how did this come about. We know for a fact that this was brought in. AI extracted all these bits of information from this note, and that's how it got populated. And that's part of the history, right? So now, whenever I work this deal, eventually I'm going to decide it's qualified, and I'll convert it into a lead. Again, I have the same kind of capability alongside any form where it's heavy duty. I've got to type a bunch of stuff in to actually just having the AI, speaking to the AI or giving the AI context and say, hey, do this on my behalf.
Yeah.
That's kind of part of the journey that we think is great. And by the way, and we keep the audio file in this case is tagged along and saved with this lead record. So AI always has the ability to review what's happened to date. If I was to kind of go further here, Pete, so for instance, as you work into the opportunity records, similar but different here, there's always an AI summary of what's going on with the deal.
Mm-hmm.
Shit, it can reflect based on activities. But the typical thing that you see is I can certainly, like, this is a nice format where I can see a lot of information about the deal along the side. But as activities pile on, right, and the deal has moved through multiple stages over a long period of time, to get a nice, concise, summary of what the deal's about, right, that is a thing that software couldn't do before, right? It could give you the numbers, it could give you, 10 activities, these 3, but it couldn't write you a summary of what's going on. And now we just take it for granted, right? That's just sort of part of what happens. So as you imagine using the system, and I've got an abstract summary for every opportunity, I can now have a conversation and say, well, tell me, about the 3 deals that are stuck in the pipeline for the last 30 days. And it's got a narrative that it can borrow and talk to.
And one of the things that I've noticed you do here, which I think is sort of plays into that, is, in a traditional CRM, you have, account records and lead records and opportunity records and whatever you happen to type in. But to make the agent really helpful to the salesperson, they need more and more context, right? And it's not just the records I typed in. It's the call that I made last week. It's the email I got yesterday. It's the diagram of their house or something. That's all really important to capture. And it seems to me that you've done a lot here to try to expand the context that we can sort of grab by building that right into this capability.
Yeah. I think as you think about designing new systems, there's a few bits of, I guess, that we learned. One, as you said, is context is king, right? The AI is only as good as the context that's provided. And context comes in the form of, what actually happened in the real world. But another kind of context is, how does my business actually run, right? So if you look at this concept of what we're calling sales playbooks, so in this case, or it's playbooks generically, in this scenario, it's adapted for sales, right? There's a methodology in every company of how, what is the sales process? And to the extent you could describe it by saying, okay, well, in this situation, we're describing it through the stages that a sale goes through. But within each stage, what are the tasks? What are the things I have to do as a salesperson to move from one stage to the next? And how can AI help me, right? So if I look at sort of let's look at an email step I've got here. I've got a step that says, hey, acknowledge the email for the lead. Here are some best practices. Here are some instructions to the AI of how they should think about this, and an email template to use when it's sending out this acknowledgement email, right? And so just by setting this up, and I set this up across for the various stages, now suddenly the AI has the capability to follow along, right? It's not just naively saying, oh, sales happen this generic way. No, sales now happen in the context of my standard operating procedures. And what's nice is, even though this looks like a fairly, kind of lengthy setup, we actually used AI to generate the setup, right? So we have a generate your own playbook, right? By here, I could upload my document that I already have that describes my playbook, and we'll generate these playbook steps on your behalf that you could, tweak it if you need to. And so now that we have this, you can go back to, when we look at opportunities and we dive into an opportunity that we've got here, you'll see these suggestions of what to do. And so, for example, here is, okay, let's notify qualification outcome, right? So here's an email that we should be drafting. This is a test system, so I don't know exactly what we got configured, but at the end of the day, it's able to auto draft an appropriate message using the context of what's happened so far, using the email template and the business practices that you said are important to you. And then importantly, like this email is not a standalone event, right? An email is just part of a long flow that you're having in a sales process. And so it's important to understand that, hey, when we send this email, for instance, I may want to be reminded, let's say if I've got no acknowledgement in the email, no response in some period of time. So I want that escalated. But importantly, after the email is sent, the system tracks the email and decides what to do next. So if there's a response, how do we parse that response into a next set of actions according to the playbook? If there's no response, what do we do? And so there's a key system here, and credit to Mike for building this quickly and professionally for us. This looks like another daunting thing, right? If you think of playbooks as sort of the human version of, hey, how does a process work? Workflows are sort of the AI version or the machine version of the set of rules of what to do. And so this gets very detailed in like, hey, send the first email. After you send that email, we want to decide if there's a response within 24 hours, what we do. If there's no response, what do we do, right? And so this whole workflow, if you will, is all about escalating, a series of email and outreaches to decide whether this is a qualified lead or something that needs to go into kind of a nurture bin because they're non-responsive. And so, and again, this looks sophisticated, but you can build this using AI as opposed to having to wire these boxes one at a time.
Right. And this also starts to feel like, I don't know about the rest of you, but I never felt like I sold the deal because of Salesforce, right? And maybe I'm being unfair, right? But this is actually enabling, and it's taking away mundane tasks so that I can focus on, as a human, maybe what I do best, develop relationships, and I'm not spending my time in the CRM, and it's actually giving me recommendations. And it, and then the accidental byproduct is much more accurate view of the sales funnel for executives so you can get predictable business results. Nobody thoroughly enjoys it, I know, going in and adding a lead, converting it.
Exactly.
Yeah. The evolution of all this ultimately feels like you've got a sales assistant effectively that you're delegating all the stuff that can be delegated, right? All the stuff that you want delegated, right? It's not the build the relationship part, but it's everything else. Like before the meeting, send out a reminder, right? Or hey, if we got a prep for a meeting, go do the prep work and bring me, draft the agenda on my behalf, right? It's all those things. I think the interface essentially shrinks to more or less in its ultimate form factor to some kind of a action inbox, as we're calling it, where all those activities are just easy for you to scan down. Like, what do I gotta do now versus later, and press the button to get started with whatever AI assistance available for that action.
And but it's not black box, right? Like, that it might be suggesting this next action, but right underneath that, you can see the workflow that is the best practice of your business. You don't need to go there all the time, but it's there, right? And it's helping organize you and your supervisor and your customer and your marketing team all to get the job done.
Once you start collecting all this context, you've enabled, you've really made this agent sort of really enable the salesperson to sort of get their job done. This also, in many ways, sort of becomes the system of record, not just for the sales process, the sales team, but for everybody else downstream in the organization in the lifetime of the customer.
Yeah, that's right. I think because context is king, you want to retain it, right? You want to grow it as much as possible. So if you think of the full lifetime journey of a customer in any business, there's sort of the initial engagement with the customer, qualifying them, prospecting them, winning them over. And then that's just the beginning, right? After that, it's all about, well, how have they engaged with us? What issues have they had? What have we done on their behalf, right? What do we want inform them of as the business grows and you've got new products or new offerings that you can market to them. It's critical to retain all that information because the more that you retain, the more personalized their experience can be as you continue to work with them. I would say this is really very new, right? This is 3 months old. Like Claude Code's been around much longer, Codex, OpenAI was doing longer, but the ability for them to stay on track, long running tasks, building things in what takes sometimes hours versus minutes, following a very detailed specification, that is only a few months old. This was not possible 6 months ago with, at least not productively. Right now, we're sort of expecting every time you run through we call it a module design, that you're going to have a pretty good solution in kind of in the first shot, and then you're going to spend hours after that continue to tweak and tune the direction that you want it to go.
If you look at what you've built alone, how long has that taken you, and how long would you expect that would have taken you a year ago?
Yeah, and I'm going to shy away from talking just about me because there's more than me. But it's a small team. Let's say a team of three. Yeah, a team of three working on this stuff. So I would say, we spent between Thanksgiving and Christmas basically building version 1. So in that time frame, with days off here and there, I would say it's something order of magnitude of 10x, to get to the same place with a team that knows what they're doing. Now I'm not learning things on the fly.
Right. Maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of the stack that we specifically used, and then how you see that. How do you think about that going forward as models change and things sort of continue to evolve?
Yeah, it's important to continue to put good abstractions in places so you're not sort of locked into today's technology. That's probably the most important part of designing an architecture. So we've leaned on sort of what I would call traditional patterns. Now, what's interesting is as you're building these out, and so for instance, choosing the right model to do the job, right? So there's a section where you configure which model do you want to do this thing, and so and your choices, for a model that's going to, let's say, draft the email versus a model that's extracting fields from a transcription, right? To be very different models. So that's sort of one layer. I think the other thing is you have to acknowledge is, and we'll get a little more into the engineering side, is there's some core decisions you have to make about, okay, what's the database strategy? What's the front end strategy? What's the interaction pattern between them? Like, where are you caching stuff? How are you optimizing for speed and scale as the stuff grows? So, if you're doing proof of concept, you don't care about any of that. You just throw something in that generally works. But if what you're trying to build is a reference architecture that will work for many kinds of applications, then you do have to, lock in those patterns. And we made some choices around using an ORM and using Postgres in this scenario as the database. And, those are, some of those decisions are changeable, right? Postgres is just a relational database. You can plug others in. The fact that we use one model versus another is, again, you can plug and play those things. But other decisions are really your system level decisions. Like, I want communication to happen in this way. We very much emphasize the idea of strong data typing front end to back end. So we used Prisma actually as an ORM that lets us infer all the data types. So one place declares what is the actual data type of anything, and that ontology, right, continues to whether you're in the front end or back end code. And it's important because AI agents love that kind of consistency. If you can point them to the source of truth and say, this is true everywhere in our project, right? It makes it much easier for them to write code that doesn't break, code that's right the first time. So there's a few of those, deeper dive decisions that we iterate on and made so that to make this project friendlier for AI coding agents. And I think that's a change of mind for a lot of folks who, may have been religiously stuck in, we do the things this way because that's the way we've done them, to now you have to think about, well, how good does that support the capabilities of AI agents, coding agents specifically?
What's the coding agent stack for you guys right now?
Yeah, I'd say it's a heavy mix of Claude Code, Cursor. We're leaning a lot on Opus 4.5 where possible, and some Codex 5.2, I guess, is now. But that ebbs and flows, I would say, as you design tasks, as there's conveniences in certain places and there's disappointments in other places that you feel like, oh, it's so close to doing this well, but it's not quite there. But
Yeah, and
those are primary tools for me, at least.
definitely mixing models. Like there's times when a certain model gets stuck, and it's stuck, and you go get an idea somewhere else, right? And
Interesting.
or certain modalities, specifically
Yeah.
generating images right now, Nano Banana hands down.
Yeah.
But as Alon pointed out, that's just a matter of staying vigilant, right? And
Right.
it comes from nothing more than knowing those models are available and trying them out. It's not like we're ranking by some benchmark or using, it's literally try it out, see how it
Yeah.
works. Okay,
Yeah.
I get it, and go.
I
It's
would
very
love
easy to switch,
models-
right? Go ahead.
Well, I would love if the models didn't get smarter, so you could just get your favorite and get really good at it. It's so annoying. You kind of know, I really need to try this other out because
Yeah, it
where
might
I'm
be
using doesn't quite get this part, and maybe this other
Yep.
model can do it. I'll still use 5.2 or Pro, basically version of 5, to build out thoughtful design for things that I then will use as input into actual coding, right? So I'm doing more brainstorming and spec building, I guess, outside of coding tools, and then bring that into the coding tool.
As folks at enterprises are going down this path, from what you guys can tell, is there any one platform, any one hyperscaler, anyone, right, that will generally have everything to do what we talked about? Or do you need to be a little bit more flexible than that?
Definitely need to be more flexible. No, they're all going to try, right? And that's
Yeah.
important. And there'll be a great solution, I'm sure, that's full stack from one vendor. But the best solution is, at least for the foreseeable, going to be a mix of
Yeah.
capabilities, or even a third party stack that
We'll have a
doesn't
best
use.
of breed perspective.
That's right.
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, so the hyperscalers or the folks, the big tech companies, they're going to have a lot of technology for you to leverage. But that technology is not really last mile kind of application technology in those
No,
cases,
right.
right? It's the infrastructure, building blocks around infrastructure capabilities. What I'm talking about, let's say you are trying to deploy an ERP solution or an HR management solution. You're not getting that from them. You're getting it from an ecosystem of vendors who specialize, let's say, in solving those kinds of problems. I'm suggesting that those kinds of vendors will increasingly need to deploy modules that you can flexibly redefine for yourself without the traditional cost of we need to be able to have lengthy design discussions and then map those onto what's possible and what's not possible within the software. I'm saying much of that should be much more iterative, much quicker to deliver, and much more flexible to deliver.
It feels like a little bit for a business executive, this is starting to flip the whole paradigm of how we traditionally evaluated build versus buy.
Yeah.
Much easier now to build, and you get a specific system or solution for your business almost quicker and cheaper than if you were to buy it and then have to configure it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it totally makes that boundary much more, it shifts it in the direction of bespoke is much more appealing, I think, in many situations. And then, it may be the kind of thing where you can pick and choose your spots, right? Where you want to be bespoke versus not. But still a thing under the hood, there's a system of record that you want to trust, right? And so you may be ingrained in systems that you're not looking to replace because you've got a lot in there. But how you build systems on top of it. So even if you think about Salesforce, right? Salesforce is not the end all of all customer relationships that you're doing, right? You may have additional software for the sales team for productivity gains. You may have, portal oriented for your clients. You may have, marketing modules, right? But you may still want to retain, sort of the core data somewhere that you're not reinventing. But in other situations, you could say, no, we can build it from scratch because it's very bespoke, right? It's a part of the business that needs its own thing. And suddenly that becomes not $1 million project, up front. It becomes build it, for hundreds of thousands or less and have a very rich, kind of solution.
I think that there's a chance that a lot of the people listening to this are going to think, oh yeah, there's a little bit of hyperbole here. What these guys do is make software. They're all about AI. And I think it's important to take a step back from that for a second and realize that there is a breakthrough that's occurred. And it's not a breakthrough in the headlines. In the headlines, the models have gotten 5% better, 8% better, 6.2% better at this particular benchmark. the tip that's occurred is that, as an engineer using the tool, it is now producing something that is good enough for me to start with, as opposed to being something that I would just look at and say, no, I better start with something on my own. But if it's going to do something good enough for me to start with, and it's going to have the power to iterate that over time, by definition, it goes 10 times faster than me to begin with, right?
Right.
So it's going 10 times faster, and it's a thing that I'm willing to get started with, and it helps me change it on an ongoing basis. It's a step change. It's a step change in the space.
Yeah, I'd call out a couple of things. One is I think the models are a piece of the puzzle, but the harness around the model is just as important. I think we've had, a couple of years of maturity now of building harnesses around the model to keep them all sort of honest or keeping on track to a task. So it's not just like one massive prompt that I've engineered and suddenly everything comes back. It's the fact that that prompt gets broken down to a plan. The plan has steps. Each step is carefully monitored and evaluated, right? So I think that layering above the model continues to mature and is a big part of the unlock. So that's a something that's definitely evolving, right? And it should only get better with additional engineering kind of focus on it. The other part is the entire flow of building software, right? It's not just let me go engineer a final thing. It's how do I gather requirements? How do I simulate what users might want? Like part of accelerating this build out is to say, okay, I've got an application that's working. Run it as if you are a user. Make notes about where there's a lot of friction or where it's unintuitive. Make those notes into effectively, PRDs or new specs that I need to implement, and then go implement those, right? Now, that's not all one go. You kind of have to guide it along the way where you're asking it to, make observations, write those observations down, but you're effectively trying to figure out how to delegate every bit of the work that you're doing to where you're just making the highest level judgment calls. Like, oh, I need more of this. I need to understand when a user is trying to do this thing, what's the issue? Or, hey, this is a problem. Like that when I'm doing this, I'm getting inconsistent results. Write an end-to-end test. Run it 10 times. Figure out why there's inconsistency, right? Like it's a tricky timing problem or state management or something that's not obvious when you're just staring at code. And in all those parts, the models have gotten good enough to where, and the harnesses around them to where they are now highly productive. So, part of the mission here is to figure out like, how do I leverage more and more of AI in the workflow, as opposed to saying, okay, the bottleneck is now I need to go get user feedback. How do I contact 100 people to get their response?
Yeah.
Well, there's a few different ways. One way is you could simulate what a user might do. And others, you could build an application that sends them a request to view a video and make comments, right? Or simulate what the underlying experience would be. We're testing all those things, and they all incrementally add to the the acceleration of how fast you could deliver working software.
And in that point around what makes this effective is the scaffolding around the coding agent is actually applicable to agents in general. So I think there's the ability to absolutely learn from what we're learning with coding agents and apply it more generally, and the need for that scaffolding. And so it's a great place to start.
If I'm running an organization that has a big development team, maybe a software company or some other kind of company, and maybe I have a different sort of an offshore strategy, and maybe I'm doing some things in Europe or I'm doing some things in different parts of the world. Should I sort of look at that potentially differently because of this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I think it's a reboot of your software development lifecycle, and I don't mean the geeky part of how to use GitHub. I mean it's a reboot of literally how you think of the timing of your software releases, how fast you think you can achieve what markets you want to go after. I mean, it's such an enabler that you may be looking at parts of your space that you would say, no, I can't tackle that. Too much infra is needed. Too much investment, but now if this can be automated, how fast can you move through that, right? So I think it's a big reboot. And then when you start talking, mechanistically, all right, if you say, yeah, Mike, I know I'm going to reboot my business, but what do I do now, right? What do I do right now? I think that's where some of the kinds of things you're pointing out. Look, I mean, any developer anywhere in the world can use this technology. Well, and maybe not in China, I guess, in some situations, but it's broad use, and intelligent people are going to be able to use it everywhere. So it's not excluding any one strategy that you already have in place. What it really is doing is saying, where are you focusing your efforts on? designing your product features or on good coding architecture, right? That's the reboot. That's the sort of bitter lesson here, is to spend more time figuring out what you want out of the solution and letting the AI take over more of the work rather than getting stuck in the minutia of what you think you needed to do because of the strategy that you had before you could take Gen AI into account.
In addition to velocity, though, it does shorten the distance. And I'm not just talking geographic distance to offshore kind of development, but the distance between development and the business. You're closer to the business and you can iterate much tighter in your own time zone and sometimes even in your own head, right? That you don't have to even go to other humans. And so I do think it does, and it will cause a fundamental rethinking of how offshore and remote development's done, because again, that distance can be shortened. And oftentimes it's that distance that creates the disconnects between what the business needs and what's delivered.
I mean, I think it's very fundamental. It's kind of like the rules have changed, right? You were, I don't know, playing tennis and somebody then inserted pickleball rules and changed the court on you and all that.
Right.
It's not the same thing. It's I mean, the end result might be, you're winning by delivering something, but first you should set your aspirations to solve the problem in a way that gains from the machine intelligence.
I'm wondering, as I'm listening to this, is there a potential now that business executives are going to have to look for? We used to talk about shadow IT, and what that typically meant is, marketing would go off and hire a vendor and they'd go build a project and, without IT being involved. It seems like more and more, maybe not today, but the opportunity for now marketing to go off and actually write their own applications, not even get a new vendor, but actually develop applications. And so that level of governance, I think, is going to become more and more important, but open to thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's going to be some fascinating opportunities ahead where, for example, vendors have to consider the downstream effects of whatever they build, in a sense that whoever wants to customize or create bespoke iterations or mashups of their solution, how do they enable that, right? So if you think in kind of the Roblox paradigm of lots of folks can create content on top of the online platform. Every business has got bespoke needs, and if the online software you're delivering has a set of well-known APIs, but more than that, right? If it has coding reference examples and best practices that a coding agent can then latch onto, I think you'll see a ton of, and I don't know if this is shadow IT or just the IT, right? The idea of customizing the CRM or customizing your ERP becomes much more like, okay, I choose my favorite vibe coding tool. I feed it, whatever my software vendor gave me as the bundle, like, hey, here's the thing you give your vibe coding tool, and then just ask for, the new custom report that you want or the new, entry form that you want. And the vibe coding tools can adhere to the guardrails that are set up by your software and the testing pattern that's set up by it. So I think we're going to see a world where a lot more customization will happen, but it'll be so much easier, right? Like, it won't require the long, like, as fast as you sort of can nail down a good spec for something and design it out. Basically, that's the hard part. After that, it's sort of automated, and you wait an hour or two, and you probably have a decent prototype for what you're trying to do, and then you go through some productionizing that whatever you did in terms of figuring out, okay, well, how does this get deployed and how does it get managed and so on, right? And there's agents all along the way to help you do that. And I think it's on the software providers to ensure that ecosystem works, as opposed to sort of trying to deliver it all like in a single and say, here's our solution.
Yeah.
It's
one of
done.
those famous phrases in 2025 was AI slop, right? The idea that you generate you ask a 5-word prompt and you get a 5-page document, and you run around with it like something that's amazing. And that's happening in software too, right? That you can ask, make me an application that, and you will get an application that, right? So really quickly something comes out. That doesn't mean that it's something that's production worthy, that can be used, and that's going to be part of how the future flows, right? It's much more likely that you're going to get a good starting point that then needs those best practices from IT and the infrastructure compliance and all that to be able to fully carry it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my take on it, because it's a really interesting question, right? if you think about it, it's sort of, AI coding agents all the way down. When something is broke, like historically you would say, okay, who's the right person on the team to fix that? Who's got the insights on how to fix that? Now we're sort of looking at it like, okay, who's got time? And everybody does roughly the same thing. They go in and say to the AI, hey, this is not working. Here's my traces or logs or whatever. Tell me what's going on.
Right.
And so you end up being much more of a generalist as a person working on it. I think that the implication of that to customers, right, is pretty interesting, which is one, your own IT department, to the extent you are provided, like when you're customizing things, if you're provided with the right kind of context. So again, this goes back to what does a vendor publish to the customer? Well, if the vendor publishes a variety, it's things that include source code level or at least abstractions or pseudocode or something, IT can go ask those questions. Hey, our customization XYZ broke, fix it. And here's a reference to the latest API changes or whatever, right? So I think it's the reliance becomes less on human understanding of the online code. It's almost like everything you look is through an AI lens, right? And you say, look, the online code is the source of truth. Nobody reads hundreds of thousands of lines of code except if you're an AI agent.
Right.
And what historically we used to try to do is write a lot of documentation to sort of, take 100,000 lines of code and explain them in 2,000 lines of English. But by just doing that, you sort of miss a lot of the details. Now you're like, no, the agent is going to go read the underlying explanation of every line of code and give you a very credible answer as to why you're seeing a change in behavior or whatever the outcome is. And that to me is just, just as big as writing the stuff from scratch, because
That's
suddenly
really interesting.
around like, oh, I just written 10,000 lines of code. How will anybody support them or understand them? It's like, that's not really.
In some ways, I think what you're saying, Alon, is in many ways, it's way easier if I have there's a premium on having access to the source code, right? But whereas if I'm buying from a vendor, I have to get in line and I have to submit a feature request, but if I have the source code, I can make the change like that.
Yeah. And so it's almost like an iceberg, right? At the top is what the human provides. This is the expected behavior. When I do X, I want to see Y. And then, all the way down at the bottom is the source code that does that, right? And so in between, what you do is you get the AI, as you're building it, you get it to keep that list growing of the expected behaviors, right? And you get it to materialize that into tests that it can apply automatically. So now it becomes straightforward for anyone who has AI coding skills, not a CRM development skills, not database skills, not networking skills, but AI coding skills to be able to make those
much
fixes.
more portable, right?
Right.
That's really interesting. Obviously, continues to sort of push in the build versus buy favor.
Yeah.
And pushes in the
I think that as you're saying that out loud, I'm like, maybe that's not the best way to set this up, because build versus buy in the historical world meant very specific things. Like you're buying a whole thing or you're building a whole thing. I think we're talking about a hybrid thing, right? You should be buying the pieces that you don't want to rewrite, the pieces that are, sort of evergreen, right? The things that need to be in place, like things that do enterprise authentication, things that do database management, all
A
that kind of
database,
stuff.
right?
Yeah.
You want to build anywhere where you have a custom need, where your need is a little
Or
different
it touches the business process of the job, or
So what you're trying to buy are the pieces that enable your customization, right?
Yeah.
As saying, let me buy a solution that's closest to what I've got, and then let me try to hack that piece.
Well, because the software providers generally would tell you, well, you need to change your process to match the software, right?
Right. Customize yourself.
Right. Exactly. You need to adjust, right? I think this completely inverts the equation. So if I were going to sort of bring home what I think are the key points I heard, one, just the whole build versus buy equation is being completely rewritten, right? In how that affects not only what I attempt to build myself versus what I buy, but also maybe even how where my development team is and how do I get them closer to the business and who product managers are. And there's a bunch of sort of interesting things that will be driven from all of that. Number two was, I think, Alon, what I saw in a lot of what you and Mike, what you guys have done is designing much more around the human and an assistant for the human trying to get a job done, as opposed to maybe feeding the system, which I think has been maybe historically how a lot of these, at least CRMs, have seemed to me.
Right.
Context is king. I think we said that a number of times, and it's the fuel for the agent. And to the degree that you can then capture that, and we didn't show this, but doing the email from the application, doing the phone call from the application, and all that context sort of immediately available is key. And then once you've done that, the CRM, depending on your business, can sort of become this front door to the system of record, because that context has value at the beginning of the relationship and ongoing as I continue to evolve my relationship with the customer. Did I miss any?
I think that's good stuff. I think the buyers, as the equation moves, you're looking to buy flexible building blocks more than a finished product, because you expect to be able to customize your finished product to your needs.
Well, guys, this has been awesome. Appreciate you sharing that with us. I think it'll be great for our audience.